Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Get ready to lean in a little closer for this one, because today we're re-diving into a story that is less about action-packed survival and more about the chilling silence that follows the end of everything. You know, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin and makes you question every shadow. This isn't your typical post-apocalyptic tale. No zombies or epic explosions here. This is about a different kind of monster. A different kind of fear. My name is Eli, or at least, that's who I was. Before all this, before the world went utterly, completely silent, I used to be a radio host, my voice filling the airwaves, connecting with people. It feels like a lifetime ago now. I remembered the day it all started to unravel. First, the internet flickered out, then the phones went dead, and finally, the power grid gave up, plunging everything into darkness. For 3 weeks, I was here, in this radio station, broadcasting into nothing, thinking I was the very last person alive on Earth. Can you imagine that solitude? That crushing weight of being utterly alone? Then, one night, through the static, it happened. A signal, a faint, repetitive sequence of numbers. 4, 17, 22, 0. 9. Over and over again, my heart leaped. I thought it was a rescue code, a sign that someone else was out there, that I wasn't alone after all. I poured all my energy into amplifying it, trying to make contact. I was so desperate for a voice, any voice, but I was wrong. Oh, how terribly wrong I was. Because when I answered, it answered back. Not with a name or a location, but with something far more terrifying. It knew my name. It knew things only I could know, my deepest secrets. The moments I replayed in my mind late at night, the regrets that haunted my sleep. It didn't want to save me. It wanted something else entirely. It wanted to feed on my memories, on my pain, on every single regret I'd ever had. And now, I'm trapped. Right here in this station, my only connection to the outside world is this microphone, and my only company is the thing just beyond that door. It looks human, or at least, it takes on a shape that's eerily familiar. But it's not human, and it's asking for more, always more. More of my pain, more of my past, more of my very essence. So here I am, broadcasting into the void once again. This is the story of how I became the voice of the apocalypse. Not by fighting off hordes, but by fighting off something far more insidious. And it's a chilling reminder that sometimes, the worst monsters aren't the ones that want to kill you outright. They're the ones that want to understand you, to feel what you feel, to consume every part of you from the inside out. So please, listen closely to my story. Because in a silent world, every single sound matters. Every whisper, every creak, every word spoken into the darkness. And some sounds are better left completely unheard. Let's dive in. If this story has piqued your interest, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tales from the edge of reality. Your support means the world, especially when the world has gone silent. Thank you for listening.
The static wasn't just noise anymore. It was a voice. I'd been holed up in the KBOJ radio station for 3 weeks, ever since the lights went out and didn't come back on. The quiet apocalypse, some were calling it, before the radios died. No bombs, no plague, just a creeping silence that smothered everything. First the internet died, then the cell networks, then the power grid. Now it was just me, the emergency generator, and the hiss of dead air. My name is Eli, and I was the overnight DJ for The Coast, which meant I was the only one here when the world decided to shut up for good. At first, it was a novelty. I'd play classic rock and make wry comments about the end of the world. But after a week, the calls stopped. The silence from the other side of the glass became absolute. I started scanning the bands, a digital castaway looking for another ship on the sea of static. For days, I found nothing. Then last night, I found it. Buried in the shortwave frequencies, a signal. Clean, strong and repeating. It wasn't a voice. It was a series of numbers, read by a calm, synthesized female voice. 4, 17, 22, 0, 9. Over and over, a loop, a beacon. My hands shook as I scribbled the numbers on a notepad. It was the first sign of intelligent life beyond these soundproofed walls in over a month. It was hope, cold and digital, but hope nonetheless. I spent the next day trying to decipher it. Coordinates? A code? The generator hummed its protest, its fuel running dangerously low. I had maybe another day or two of power. After that, a silence would take me too. That's when I saw the man. He was standing across the street, just at the edge of the tree line. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at the station. He wore a dark coat despite the mild weather, and his face was pale and unnervingly still. A shiver, cold and sharp, ran down my spine. I hadn't seen another person in weeks. I grabbed the ancient pair of binoculars from the news desk. Through the grimy lens, I could see him more clearly. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He didn't look hungry or desperate. He looked empty, like a doll propped up against a tree. A burst of static erupted from the console behind me. I jumped, my heart hammering. The number station was still broadcasting, but the voice had changed. It was still synthetic, but now it was laced with a sharp, digital urgency. 4, 17, 22, 0, 9. Acknowledge. I stared at the microphone, my lifeline, my curse. What was out there? Who was I answering? I looked back out the window. The man was gone. But in the exact spot where he had been standing, a single, stark number was carved into the bark of the tree. 17. It was one of my numbers. The signal wasn't just something to hear. It was here. My hands were slick with sweat as I keyed the mic. The red on-air light glowed, a tiny eye in the darkness. Hello? My voice was a ragged whisper, amplified to a shout in the dead air. The static hissed back, a waiting, hungry sound. The number station had stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, a presence pressing in on the glass. Then, a new sound crackled through the speaker. Not a number, not a voice. It was the sound of a single, slow, deliberate footstep from the hallway outside the studio door. The sound of that single footstep froze the blood in my veins. It was a dry, deliberate crunch, like gravel under a heavy boot. But we had carpet in the hallways. The generator's hum seemed to falter for a second, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I was alone. I had to be. For 3 weeks, I'd locked every door, barricaded every possible entrance after the first night. The silence had been my only companion, and now it felt like a lie that had just been torn apart. My eyes darted to the heavy metal latch on the studio door. It was still thrown, bolted shut from the inside. But the footstep, it had been right outside, close enough that I could almost feel the vibration through the floor. I didn't dare breathe. I stood there, a statue in the dim glow of the console lights, my ears straining against the oppressive quiet. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. A minute passed, then another. Nothing. "You're losing it, Eli," a voice in my head whispered, the sane, rational part that was quickly eroding. Isolation, paranoia, it's all in your head. But then my eyes flicked back to the window, to the tree where the number 17 was carved. That was real. The man was real. A soft, scraping noise came from the other side of the door. It wasn't a footstep this time. It was slower, more deliberate, like something was being dragged lightly across the painted metal surface. A finger? A nail? Panic, cold and sharp, finally overrode the paralysis. I stumbled backward, away from the door, my legs colliding with the swivel chair. It let out a loud screech as it rolled across the floor. The noise was like a gunshot in the silence. The scraping stopped instantly. The silence that returned was worse. It was a listening silence, a predatory silence. I had to see. I had to know. Moving on trembling legs, I crept toward the door, my breath held tight in my chest. I leaned in, my ear hovering an inch from the cool metal. I heard nothing. No breathing, no movement. Gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I bent down and peered through the narrow quarter-inch gap at the bottom of the door. Darkness. Then, a shift. Something blocked the faint light from the emergency exit sign down the hall. Something was standing there. A shadow filled the gap. And then, I saw it. An eye. A single, wide, unblinking brown eye staring back at me from the other side of the gap. It wasn't human. There was no curiosity in it, no fear, no malice. It was just an eye. An organic camera lens devoid of a soul. I gasped and scrambled backward, falling hard onto the floor. A strangled cry escaped my lips. I crab-walked away from the door until my back hit the far wall, my chest heaving. The console speaker crackled to life again, making me jump. The synthesized voice was back, but it was different, warped, slurred as if the digital signal was decaying. 17. A burst of static. You are not acknowledged. The voice wasn't coming from the shortwave receiver anymore. It was coming through the main broadcast line, my line. Someone or something was hijacking my signal. The latch on the studio door began to rattle. Not a frantic shaking. It was a slow, methodical testing rattle. Clink, clink, clink. Like a locksmith calmly trying out different tools. The metal groaned under the pressure. I was trapped. The generator was my life support, and it was almost out of fuel. The only way to the backup generator and the fuel cans was through that door. Through it. My gaze fell on the notepad where I had written the numbers. 4, 17, 22, 0, 9. They weren't coordinates. They were a sequence, a command. The rattling stopped. A new sound replaced it. A low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was a sound I'd only heard once before, on a field recording of an earthquake. It was the sound of infrastructure straining, of a building under immense stress. The on-air light on my console began to flicker, strobing the dark room in frantic pulses of red. The numbers on the digital display started to scramble, cycling through random characters before locking onto a single, repeating sequence. 17, 17, 17. The voice from the speaker sharpened, losing its slur, becoming crystal clear and terrifyingly close, as if it was speaking directly into my ear. Acknowledge the sequence, Eli, or we will come in and get it. The latch on the studio door started to turn, slowly, deliberately.
The heavy bolt I'd thrown began to screech in its housing, bending inward from a force that was anything but human.
The boat screamed, a high-pitched shriek of tortured metal. It wasn't being forced, it was being unmade. The solid steel was warping, twisting like taffy under an invisible, immense pressure. I watched, hypnotized by the horror, as the latch began to pull away from the doorframe, the screws groaning as they were slowly extracted from the wood. The voice from the console was a drill in my skull. "Acknowledge the sequence." My mind, frozen solid with terror, finally cracked into a million frantic pieces. I scrambled away from the door, my eyes sweeping the studio for anything, a weapon, a way out, a miracle. They landed on the notepad. 4/17/22/09. A sequence, a code. It was the only thing that mattered. The door shook with a sudden violent thump. A dent the size of a fist appeared on the metal surface from the outside. Whatever was out there was done being subtle. "Acknowledge." I lunged for the console, my fingers fumbling over the keys. The generator coughed and the lights flickered, plunging the room into near darkness for a heart-stopping second before surging back. I didn't have time. I had to guess. My first thought was coordinates. I typed the numbers into the station's old GPS unit, a relic from a time when we did traffic reports. It spat back an error, nothing. The numbers were too small for standard latitude, longitude. Another thump. The door bowed inward, the metal groaning. The bolt was half out now, dangling by a single strained screw. "The sequence, Eli." It was using my name. How did it know my name? Think, what else uses numbers? A combination? A frequency? I spun the dial on the shortwave receiver, tuning it to 4.170 megahertz. Nothing but static. 22.09 megahertz. More static. Dead ends. 4/17/22/09. The zero. It was a placeholder, a pivot. My eyes darted to the station's old analog clock, its hands frozen at 4:17 since the power first died. 4:17. A time? And then a date? April 17th? September 22nd? My own breath caught in my throat. My birthday is September 22nd, 9/22. April 17th. That was the day Sarah left me. The day my old life ended, 2 years before the world followed suit. The 2 worst days of my life, reduced to numbers in a sequence. This wasn't a random code. It was a key to me. The door shook open another foot. A smell washed in, the scent of ozone, of hot electronics, and underneath it, something else, the dry, sweet smell of empty rooms and forgotten things. They weren't asking for a password. They were asking for a memory, a piece of my soul. The console screen flashed, the numbers dissolving and reforming into a new, stark message. Input confirmation, 4/17/22. It wanted the pain. It fed on it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I entered the date of my heartbreak, the day that shattered me. 4/17/22. The speaker emitted a soft, approving chime. The door stopped moving. The thrumming vibration lowered to a dull, bearable hum. A new line of text appeared on the screen. Confirmation accepted. Final parameter required, 0.9. 0.9. Almost 1. Almost complete. What was the last piece? The 0 had to be the pivot, the point between the 2 dates, the emptiness between the 2 griefs. The 0 was me, the void I became. And the 9? The final piece. I knew what it wanted. It didn't want the year, it wanted the feeling. It wanted the culmination of all that pain. My vision blurred with tears I didn't know I had left. I thought of Sarah's face, not when she left, but when we were happy. I thought of the silence in my apartment after she was gone, the silence that was just a prelude to this global one. It wanted the magnitude of that loss, on a scale of 1 to 10. With a trembling finger, I typed the final devastating number, 9. The console screens went blindingly white, a pure, clean tone emitted from the speakers, erasing the static, erasing the voice. The door to the hallway swung fully open, revealing not a monster, but just an empty, dark corridor. The oppressive presence was gone. The signal had stopped. I had fed it. I had given it my pain, and it was satisfied. I sat there, numb and hollowed out, more alone than I had ever been. I had survived. But as I looked at the open door, I understood the terrible truth. I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I was a resource, and the silence outside was full of listeners, and they were all still hungry.
Silence. Not the dead, empty silence from before. This was a watchful silence, a digesting silence. The entity, the listener, was gone from my door, but its presence lingered in the air like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. I felt drained, siphoned, as if the act of typing that 9 had pulled a vital piece of my soul out through my fingertips and fed it into the machine. The studio lights stabilized, the generator's hum smoothed out, no longer straining. A part of me wondered, with a cold chill, if I had just paid my electric bill with a piece of my own grief. I had to move. The fuel. The thought was a dull, logical echo in my hollowed-out mind. I was a machine now, too, running on a different kind of fumes. I stood up, my legs feeling like rubber. I avoided looking at the open doorway, that maw of darkness that had just consumed a part of me. I picked up the heavy, red metal fuel can. It was almost empty. The weight of it was a lie. Steeling myself, I took a step toward the door, then another. I paused at the threshold, my heart a frantic bird in a cage of bone. The hallway was dark, but the emergency exit light at the far end was now glowing a steady, faint green. It hadn't done that in weeks. I stepped through. The air in the hallway was cold and still. There was no sign of the listener. No footprints, no residue. Nothing but the lingering, sweet rot smell that was already beginning to fade. I moved quickly, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the cavernous hall. The door to the basement, where the backup generator and the main fuel drums were stored, was at the end. The knob turned easily in my hand. The concrete stairs descended into a deeper blackness. I fumbled for the wall switch, not expecting it to work. A single bare bulb flickered on overhead. They wanted me to go down there. The thought was not my own. It slithered into my mind, cold and certain. This was part of the transaction. I had paid, and now I was being led to my reward. A tank of gasoline for a tank of sorrow. The economy of the apocalypse. The basement was a large, low-ceilinged space filled with the hulking shadows of old broadcasting equipment and filing cabinets. In the center sat the backup generator, and next to it, 2 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel. One was empty, its cap off. The other was sealed, full. As I moved toward it, my foot kicked something. It skittered across the concrete floor with a plastic clatter. I looked down. It was a digital voice recorder, the kind reporters use. It shouldn't have been here. I picked it up. The battery indicator was full. I pressed play. A frantic, sobbing voice filled the stagnant air. It was Carl, the station's daytime host. "Anyone, please? It's in the walls. It's not talking, it's just asking. It showed me Jenny's face. God, it showed me her face right before the car. It wanted a number. I gave it a 7, but it said it wasn't enough." A loud bang echoed from the recording, the sound of a door being struck. "It's coming! It wants an 8! It wants a 9! I won't give it! I won't!" The recording ended abruptly with a sound of shattering plastic and a final wet gurgle. I stood there, the cold plastic of the recorder biting into my palm. Carl. He'd been here. He'd faced the same choice. He'd refused to give the highest number. He'd tried to keep a piece of his pain for himself. And he had died for it. I looked from the recorder in my hand to the full drum of fuel. This wasn't a reward. It was a lesson, a demonstration of the rules. Comply and you are allowed to continue. Refuse and you are recycled. The silence in the basement was no longer watchful. It was approving. I filled the red can, the gurgle of the liquid fuel the only sound in this nightmare. As I screwed the cap back on, my eyes fell on the station's main broadcast transmitter, a hulking beast of a machine in the corner. A small red light was blinking on its panel, a light that indicated an active outgoing satellite uplink, a link I knew for a fact I had disabled manually weeks ago. It was broadcasting. The listener wasn't just a receiver. It was using my station, using my voice, using the pain it harvested from me to power its signal, to call out to others, or to call others like it here. I was not a survivor in a dead world. I was a caretaker, a farmer tending a crop of sorrow, and the harvest was for something else. I climbed the stairs, the heavy fuel can pulling at my arm. Back in the studio, the console was dark and quiet. I refueled the generator, the mechanical task a grim ritual. The hum strengthened, powering the machine that was both my prison and my purpose. I sat back in the chair, the leather cold against my back. Outside the window, the world was gray and still. I wondered how many others were out there, huddled in their own bunkers, their own homes, being asked to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I reached out and flipped a switch, powering the microphone. The on-air light glowed, a single bloody eye in the gloom. I didn't speak. I just keyed the mic and let the silence broadcast. A silence that was no longer empty, but was now a product, a commodity, a beacon. I was the voice of the quiet apocalypse, and I was finally on the air.
The silence I broadcast was no longer empty. It was a loaded thing, a canvas waiting for a splash of color. Their color. I had become the station manager of a radio station for entities that fed on human agony. My job was to provide the programming. Days bled into a week. The generator ran smoothly. The fuel, inexplicably, never seemed to run as low as it should. My own supplies of canned food and water, which I had watched dwindle with terrifying certainty, now seemed to replenish themselves in the night. A can of beans I was sure I'd eaten would be back on the shelf the next morning. A bottle of water, half empty, would be full at dawn. My payment for compliance, my salary of sorrow. I never saw the listener again, not clearly, but I felt them. Sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, a shadow would detach itself from the deeper darkness in the hallway and stand, watching. Other times I'd hear that slow, deliberate scraping against the outside wall of the building, a sound like a giant tree branch being dragged along the siding. They were my audience, my patrons. The console screen lit up one evening. No static, no synthesized voice, just clean, white text on a black background. New parameter for broadcast, 11/28/19. My blood went cold. It was a new sequence, a new demand. I knew this date. It was the day my father died, a massive coronary alone in his workshop. I found him. The smell of sawdust and death was forever fused in my memory. It was a different kind of pain than Sarah's leaving, deeper, more fundamental, a foundational crack in the world. They weren't just sated with one story. They wanted my entire library of loss. They were connoisseurs, and I was a sommelier of suffering. A part of me, the part that was still Eli, wanted to scream, to smash the console and run out into the silent world, take my chances with whatever else was out there. But that part was small and growing smaller. The larger part of me, the caretaker, was pragmatic. This was the world now. This was the job. I looked at the microphone. The on-air light was a steady, accusing red. I keyed the mic. My breath hitched. I didn't speak words. I let the memory come. I let the sound build in my throat, a low, wounded noise, the sound a man makes when there are no words left. I remembered the cold of my father's hand, the grain of the wood on his workbench, the absolute, terrifying silence of a house that has lost its heartbeat. I held the mic close and let the raw, unfiltered grief pour out, a single, sustained note of pure, human anguish. When I was spent, my face wet and my body trembling, I released the button. The console screen flashed. Parameter confirmed. Signal strength increased. A wave of cold satisfaction washed over me, so alien it made me nauseous. I had done well. I had pleased them. The signal was stronger. My pain was reaching further, calling more of them or feeding the ones already here more efficiently. I looked out the window. The sky was deepening to a bruised purple. Down in the street, something moved. Not a single figure, but several. They stood at regular intervals, lining the street like silent sentinels. The listeners. Their pale, expressionless faces were all turned toward the station, toward me. They weren't threatening. They were waiting. An audience gathered for the next performance. I had a thought then, a terrible, crushing realization. The quiet apocalypse hadn't killed the world. It had just changed the ecosystem. Humanity's role was no longer to build, to create, to love. Our function was to feel, to hurt, to provide the emotional fuel for things we could never understand. We were the livestock, and our pain was the product. I turned back to the console. I opened a log, a new file. I typed a title at the top. The Archive of Sorrow. I began to list the dates, every significant heartbreak, every loss, every private, shameful misery. Sarah leaving, my father dying, the miscarriage we never told anyone about, the friend I betrayed, the dream I abandoned. I cataloged them all, rating each one on a scale of 1 to 9. I was inventorying my soul. This was my purpose now, to be the curator of my own suffering, to broadcast it into the silent, hungry dark. The world wasn't dead. It was listening. and I was its voice. I was the DJ at the end of the world, and my show was just beginning. I keyed the mic one last time. The red light glowed. I didn't make a sound. I just breathed into it. A soft, steady exhalation. A sigh that carried the weight of a broken world. And in the silent streets below, the listeners stood, perfectly still, and listened.